How can the Big 12 and the Pac-12 keep up with the Big 10 and the SEC and one team at least in the ACC? That is today's talking point. I am Josh Neighbors of Locked On Big 12. Spencer McLaughlin is here of Locked On Pac-12. And, as many differences as these conferences have had, one thing has kind of been consistent, at least in the recent kind of memory. It's been difficult for them to win championships. The Big 10, the SEC, and then Clemson have won a lot. And, we're not going to solve anything, I guess, today, but I guess kind of figure out what the path is to a championship for some of these schools. And it comes at a time where we've got only one 14 college football playoff left. Then we're going to go to 12. But to me, I'm not really sure.
Which
12,
makes me sad, but oh well.
I know it makes you sad.
I'll keep supporting the sport, I guess.
It'll put more teams in. I'm not sure let's start there. Does a 12-team playoff get the Pac-12 and the Big 12 closer to a championship?
No,
even if
not
they put more teams
even
in?
remotely close, in my view. Great case in point of why I believe this exists at the FCS level, by the way, in North Dakota State. North Dakota State is the Alabama of FCS football, which, by the way, if you have never followed, is electric in many places, just as loud, as big, as popular, and as passionate as FBS football. But in terms of, the in-stadium experience, if you go to the right place, I've been to several and they're really, really awesome. But go look at how many national championships North Dakota State has won since 2010. Yeah, it'll give the Pac-12 and the Big 12 basically an automatic bid into the playoff every year, right? It's the 6th highest ranked conference champions. Hard to see how even in the current and evolving college football landscape, the Big 12 and Pac-12 don't fall into that conversation with whoever those conference champions are. But just because you put more teams in there, like the FCS playoffs do, it is still going to come down to who's got the best team and who's got the best coach and who's the most well-run program. And that has consistently been North Dakota State. They are Alabama down there and they win all the time. And I think that people who proclaim the notion, well, you'll have more parity if you have 12 teams in there. Which national championship team is losing to a team that couldn't get into the top 4 over the last several years? Who that didn't make the 14 playoff a year ago was beating Georgia either of the last 2 seasons? I don't see where that team is. Who was beating LSU in 2019? Who was beating Bama in 2020? The calculus for winning a national championship remains the same. We'll just give some participation trophies out to a bunch of teams.
All right, but here's what I'll push back on this. It's going to make the product better, right? I mean, think about how bad, think about how bad our New Year's Six Bowls have become because of the type of talent that is deciding not to play in those games.
But you don't have a guarantee that level of talent. I agree, opt-outs are not great for bowl season, though I am still a fan of bowl season writ large. But you don't have a guarantee that a guy who's going to be a top 5 pick and is playing on a number 10 seed is going to, stick it out.
Right. But I think if we're talking about you can compete for a national championship, you've got that opportunity. I think there'd be some questions asked of some guys who decided at that point of the year, right? I'm going to go. I'm not going to, because it's different, right? So let's just say if Marvin Harrison Jr. right now said, look, I think I'm the best receiver in next year's draft. I am not going to play. He is. Right. So he's like, I'm not going to play at all. I'd be like, this makes a lot of sense, right? Jamar Chase did this. If you play a whole season, 12 games, and it's actually funny because it's weird to argue this, but you could argue, hey, that person gave more to their school. But if they opted out and they've gotten their team there with a chance to win a title, I think generally speaking, there will be some guys who do what you say. But I just think of that Carolina A&M Orange Bowl a couple years ago, where was here's Sam Howell, and none of the guys he was throwing passes to were handing the ball off to the entire season, and it makes for a crappy product. And so what you're now doing is you're flipping those games into playoff games, right? Which I think is good. I completely agree with you when it comes to who our eventual champion will be. I could not agree more with you. The data bears that out. The FCS bears that out. We're all on the same page.
Yeah.
But I think there is nothing wrong with adding more consequential games to the system. And also at the same point too, the NFL just went to, and I don't love the fact that I don't think there's 7 teams that should be in,
Nope,
but
I don't like it
who's,
either.
but who's complaining about more football on wild card weekend? I'm certainly not.
Me,
I'm not
it's
going to,
me.
well,
I'm the guy.
no, Spencer, that makes you that's like the most communist thing I've ever heard in my life. I mean, come on, more
Whoa.
football on wild card weekend. What?
Okay, I am a
And I'm an anti-week 7. I'm an anti-17 games guy too.
sorry, I
I'm
didn't
like,
catch
I don't
my
even
throat
need
there, but
I'm like, we didn't need the extra game, but I will take the extra playoff team, even though I'm not really sure what it does.
I am a Seahawks fan, have been my entire life. They are my beloved NFL team. They were the beneficiary of the rule last year. That team should not have been in the playoffs. I am just a stickler for having the necessary urgency in the regular season that we have had in football for all this time. And it's always been more prevalent in college than the NFL, by the way, which is my biggest objection to going to a 12-team playoff. Is now when Alabama loses, the whole country is not going to care. Because guess what? Alabama's going to lose 2 or 3 games and still get into the playoff. That's not as exciting. But
yes, I do think there is a certain amount of that. I think you're right. But we do have to acknowledge that 6 automatic bids does make it a little bit
yeah, I'm not totally against it. Like, I don't think it's all negative. To me, the negatives just outweigh the positives that the college football playoff brings. I'm not a huge fan of bowl game opt-outs, but I do think that the silver lining there is for fans of those particular teams. You get an opportunity to see guys.
Yeah, but I don't want to see that in the Orange Bowl, right? Like the Orange Bowl should be for something.
Okay, that's fair. But you also have to look at the really talented teams, and I suppose Ohio State's a bit of an exception here. But look at like the 20 was it the not this past Rose Bowl, but the one before, right?
Like nobody played
against Utah,
game.
right? Ohio State's wide receivers sat out of the game.
Sure.
But then we were introduced to Jackson Smith and Jigba and Marvin Harrison.
But not every team is right.
Not every team is Ohio State, but it does provide an opportunity on that front. But look, if that is a byproduct of expanding the playoff, then okay, like I will acknowledge that is a positive. It's not enough for me to change my stance personally on how I feel about the whole thing.
Right.
But I do think that if that comes about, I'm here for it, because I don't like opt-outs, because I'm very much a traditionalist. I like bowl season. I was fine with the 14 playoff, by the way. I think 4, maybe 6, but I don't really need 6. Like if you want to do 6, that's fine. But anything,
I like the inclusive nature though of the 12, right? Like the fact they're doing 6 conference champions. Hell yeah, man. But there is going to be one conference every year, Spencer, that we call the group of 5, which is like the least inspired name ever. It's going to get a team in there every year. And I actually don't care if they get ragdolled by somebody. They're going to be in the damn dance.
I think it's good for them to have that. But we also saw that it is possible for a group of 5 team to get into the college football playoff. That is not an impossible feat.
Right. No, but it's extremely challenging to do. I mean,
it's always challenging.
I'll put it to you this way. Cincinnati had to put the work in the previous, like they're 12-1 in 2020, whatever year it was.
I think it was 2020.
Right. So the year they only lost to Georgia in that bowl game that, they really should have beat Georgia in that bowl game. But
wait, which Cincinnati team are you talking about? They played Alabama.
The one that did not make the playoff.
Oh, okay.
They basically had to go like 23-1 in 2 years to do it. Like they had to earn all of that respect to get there. Okay, that's not fair.
No, I'm good with that, because you're operating in a different level of competition, as we know.
Yeah, but once again, they won the field with Georgia, who 1 year away from winning a national championship, and were just as good as them. If they'd managed the clock better, they would have won the game. Well, all I'm saying is that it should not be a situation where a team has to put in a 2-year stretch of 23-1 football, because every single year should be independent. Cincinnati had to earn the respect 1 year and then cash it in the next year with a perfect season. And actually, they gave Alabama, I thought, a better contest than a lot of schools gave.
I think the better way for a group of 5 teams to have a better shot at it under the current model, and this point is, I suppose, moot at this point in time, since the 12-team playoff is on its way after this season, is to alter the scheduling, give them a chance to put a quality non-conference opponent on their resume every single year, so that if they feel as a program they are ready to go try and play Notre Dame like Cincinnati did, have that on their resume, and then go unbeaten or 1 loss in conference play and have a chance to get into the playoff. I think that's a positive thing.
The issue is for them though, once you start getting like Cincinnati, the number of Power 5 schools that want to play you and also do play you at home as well in a home and home situation.
Yeah, no,
Goes down, but
the scheduling is a separate conversation,
right. It's such a
I'm
conversation.
I'm in favor of certain requirements for all Power 5 schools that you have to have at least a certain number of games on there. But that be not a problem for the Pac-12 and Big 12. They can get sufficient number of games.
So we'll talk more about this. First, quick word from the folks at Built Bar. Healthy and amazing taste, I should say. Our Built Bars covered in 100% real chocolate. They come in unbelievably delicious flavors like churro, peanut butter brownie, and cookies and cream. It's hard to fathom how they can get so much, and not in the calorie department, into these bars. Only 130 calories, 4 grams of sugar, which is actually, that's a good amount of sugar, right? You put the carbs in, get ready for the workout, whatnot. So just 4 grams of sugar, despite the fact of being completely covered in chocolate, and also whopping 17 grams of protein. You guys can get them now at Walmart or at Sam's Club in the big old variety pack. Spencer and I are both fans of the Built Bars, so make sure you guys check them out. So, Spencer, a point that you brought up, and it's totally right, is that 12-team playoff does not get Big 12 and Pac-12 schools closer. It actually gets them further away, right? Because the number of games you have to win to get to a championship
does it make them further away? That's an interesting
right.
question.
So
I haven't thought about that before.
In a 14 playoff, how many games do you have to win to be the crown of the national champion?
15?
2. No. I'm saying TCU, how many games once they were in the playoff they have to win it all?
Right.
Now you put yourself into the 12-team playoff, and even if you get a bye, you have to do the round of 8, the round of 4, and the championship game, which for the Big 12 and the Pac-12 schools means you most likely are going to have to beat 3 Blue Bloods to be crowned champion. And we saw how that went for TCU this year, right? They got one of them, and once again, they never trailed Michigan in that game, not once. They shot themselves in the foot, just as much as Michigan did, still never trailed. But once they met Georgia, my God, was there a difference?
Yeah, there was. Yeah, go ahead.
Go ahead. No,
I was just going to say there was a massive difference there, to be sure. But I think that Michigan game was telling, because the Big Ten has been long perceived as stronger than the Big 12 and the Pac-12 for quite some time. And as you pointed out, TCU led that entire game, and they could not be stopped. Michigan had no answers for them in that department. Now, Georgia did. I think when you look at these great SEC teams, I think that's when some other conferences, most notably the Big 12 and the Pac-12, but kind of the Big Ten, it's kind of matchup dependent there. Sometimes you just have to throw up your hands and say, all right, I give up. Just you're the best team this year. That's sort of what it is, because they're just capable of reaching that level, whereas other conferences are not. But you see the Big 12 going toe-to-toe with the Big Ten in the playoff. And I just wonder, Josh, if Ohio State beats Georgia, which they very nearly did. Like, I think there's a coaching and schematic element here as well. Like, I think we all agree at some level, Sonny Dykes' TCU team this year in year 1 was a bit of a flash in the pan, right? They had a lot of things go their way, a lot of close games that they ended up pulling out. They were a very good team, but they're
old too, which really they got a lot of old dudes.
They were a veteran team. But it feels like they caught lightning in a bottle. And if you play out that season 10 times, the old miracle speech from Herb Brooks, right? It's like, if you played them 10 times, they might win 9. But not this game. If you play out that season for TCU 10 times, 9 out of 10 times, they're probably not even in the playoff. That one, they are there. But it's such a fascinating thing to examine TCU and say, okay, so here they were beating the Big Ten champs who drubbed Ohio State in Columbus. But then Ohio State went toe-to-toe with Georgia for the entirety of the game. But then TCU led Michigan the entire time.
The reason for that being is that Ohio State is an athletic team, right? The athleticism of Ohio State,
but they don't have the physicality,
right? Which was the weird part of this. And
it was very strange.
It was very strange.
Well, CJ Stroud and his receivers were very, very good.
Michigan now, in consecutive years, has beaten the hell out of Ohio State at the point of attack, and they could not do it to TCU. And then Georgia turned around and did it right to TCU. What we have to acknowledge here, and I'm not sure how familiar you are with this, Spencer, but the blue chip ratio that Bud Elliott does every single year. Basically, if those of you do not know, the blue chip ratio is something that Bud Elliott puts out. It says to win a national championship, and this is basically borne out in the data, to win a national championship, you must have more 4 and 5 stars on your roster than you do 3 stars and below. And I don't know how he factors transfers in, but I think it's somewhat similar. The only team in either of these two conferences, and this is only remaining team in either of these two conferences, that satisfies that rule is the Oregon Ducks. And last year in 2022, they were at 60%. And I expect, Spencer, you're an Oregon guy too. Not to get too specific though, they'll continue to satisfy that. But with that being said, they don't feel like they're that close to winning a championship, at least at the moment, right? I think we go back and we look at the way that Oregon State just ran the ball repeatedly and then did it like 25 times in a row. We look at the way that Utah handled them twice the previous season, and we can kind of feel that way. So, you need to be in that group. The question is, and I think you probably feel the same way about this, Clemson's the model because they're the real outlier, right? Weird private school, small town, very
Clemson's a private school?
It is Clemson.
I did not know that.
It is. Clemson, small private school. Well, it's not small, but private school, South Carolina. They had a very good football program for a long amount of time, but Clemsoning was the joke, right? It could never get over the hump. Dabo Swinney has great coordinators. He's not an X's and O's guy, but he has really good X's and O's guys who help him along the way. They're able to get really awesome talent, and they're able to break through with fantastic players, not people. Deshaun Watson, guys like that. Obviously, the amount of talent they've had in defensive line, obviously the skill position players they've had as well, right? Trevor Lawrence, quarterback too. And so the question I think I have for you, Spencer, is, Oregon's kind of the top candidate out of everybody, even though you'd think, hey, why isn't TCU top candidate? Well, like you said, like it's hard to see that happening again. And also, I think any team that has that we've coalesced type year, it's hard to win like that because once you reach the mountaintop, like the very, very top, you're playing teams that have been there a bunch before and coaches who have, like, much like Kirby, he's lost multiple times in games that he's been winning. He's learned from his losses clearly and knows what the hell he is doing. So how do you do it is the question.
Yeah, I think there's a confluence of factors that have to take place. Like the recruiting element appears to be pretty well borne out by the data as you referred to, and Oregon does expect to be, from a recruiting standpoint, in 2022 and 23, like in that sort of range. But still, you saw how they matched up with Georgia, the national champions, in September of this past year, right?
It looked much like TCU did.
Right. They looked exactly like TCU did. So I think that you have to have that as a component, but it's not the only thing you have to have. You've got to have the coaching chops. And I love what you brought up with Kirby Smart and Dabo Swinney. For anyone listening or watching this right now, can you tell me when Dabo Swinney was hired as Clemson's head coach? Correct me if I'm wrong here, Josh. I believe it was around 2009 or 2010.
Yes.
His first national championship came in 2016. Building this stuff up and then having a college football season in which you have the perfect storm of events. You've recruited well. You've got great coordinators who haven't left you for head coaching positions yet. You've got spectacular players. You've probably got a great quarterback in there.
09, by the way.
That's 09. Yeah. That sort of stuff takes a long time to build, right? And it's why fans, stay invested in this sport and why you can get so excited about one particular season, right? Like, look at Oregon State. Their fans are buzzing right now because they're wondering, hey, is Jonathan Smith about to build this thing into a perennial 8 to 10 win team? And if we do that for 5 to 6 years, can we raise our recruiting profile? Can we win a Rose Bowl, get to a Rose Bowl, get to a Pac-12 championship game, right? It's all about the future and the long game because that's usually what it takes. Nick Saban didn't win in year one at Alabama, but even if you are wanting to talk about Saban, he's the outlier, right? He's not the rule. He is the exception, right? Other national championship winning coaches. How long was Jimbo at Florida State? How long was Dabo Swinney at Clemson? How long was Kirby Smart at Georgia? How long was Georgia a really, really good team? This stuff is just not done in a day. So for our two conferences, Josh, is it attainable? Yes.
I don't think it is.
Well,
or at least I don't. Well, it is, But
Here-
so the
here's
Oregon State example. Go ahead, finish.
here's what I feel like the Big 12 and Pac-12 need going forward if they're going to get over that hump, right? I mean, USC leaving the Pac-12 is obviously a killer to their chances. Now you're basically looking at Oregon, Washington in the short term. I don't think Utah is quite there, though but Whittingham might retire and like all that sort of stuff. That's in the next couple of years and such. But if he were to retire 2 years from now, you'd probably assume Utah would pull back a bit. But I think what the Big 12 and Pac-12 need is very much, what mid-majors often get in March Madness sometimes. Sometimes you have to step up and you got to go toe-to-toe. Look at San Diego State, right? Who we both want in our conferences. They stepped up to the plate and they beat Alabama, right? You got to be able to do that. You got to have the players do it. Absolutely. But you know what else San Diego State got? They got to play Furman in the second round. There's no guarantee they beat Virginia. So I think when you're looking at the conferences that are at a financial and competitive disadvantage at some level, like the Pac-12 and the Big 12 are, you have to have one of those seasons, somewhat like TCU did this year, and you have to get some breaks. You have to get help. You have to get the right.
The problem is you don't get
matchups.
breaks though when they reach the end of the line. And so I want to touch on your Oregon State point because I want to compare Oregon State to Kansas State.
Okay.
So I think Kansas State under Bill Snyder and then now under Chris Kleiman is a great example of what you talked about. Perennial 8-win team. And when those perennial 8-win teams, when you have when one of those cycles or two of those cycles have like the right collection of guys, that 8, 9 goes to, 8, 7, 8 goes to 9, 10, and sometimes even 11. And Kansas State, a good example this year, they were 9-3. They had 3 losses along the way, but they end up beating TCU in the championship game in an absolute thrill ride of a game. And they batter Alabama for about 2 minutes, three minutes. And then Alabama, Bryce Young showed why he's the number 1 pick, was just dropping unbelievable dimes everywhere. And so that's the problem. And I hate to do this to the state university schools, to the public schools, but it's weird to think. It feels odd to think that the public schools are the ones that are going to have a challenge doing it. But the reason why I think a TCU can do it, and I think Oregon's actually an exception, but the reason why TCU and Baylor feel like examples of schools that have a better chance at it is because when you get the private schools with the potential to get a ton of money, right, from just like the really, the massive boosters who are like, all right, we're going to pay whatever it takes. We're going to hire the right guy, all that kind of stuff. Like it becomes a bit more possible. I don't know what it is, but I maybe it's just because we haven't seen a large state school do it, I guess, outside of the USC, another example, right? Private school is a Pac-12 version. Private school mid-2000s, they kind of had that entire thing rolling. I don't know what it is. Now, Oregon's the exception, Spencer, because they are Nike's college football school.
Right.
And so with that becomes a different level of economic ability and recruiting ability. I mean, we're talking about now kids, how much they use social media. We see it all the time, the recruiting videos. Oregon's better than a lot of SEC schools. Oregon's facilities are just as good as the SEC schools.
And they out-recruit a lot of SEC schools as well.
And getting kids up there can be it's a challenge, but they have plenty of hits on getting kids up there.
Yeah, they do. And I think on the recruiting front, for schools in both conferences, you just have to manage expectations at some level, right? And I think fans do actually in terms of recruiting.
Right, but we're talking about doing the whole shebang. I mean, this is kind of expectations out the window.
And it's why, by the way, when I've talked about expansion candidates, SMU is near the top of that list because they fall into that private school category in which they have a lot of money. They've got a lot of wealthy donors. They can get a lot of money into that school. And by the way, if you're talking about Pac-12 schools, most likely to be able to get into the playoff or the national championship discussion in a serious way in the age of NIL and the portal and just, paying money and paying outrageous salaries to coaches and whatnot, it's unclear as to whether or not they'll be able to do this going forward. But do we all remember what Stanford football was in the early 2010s? Because they were trying to get to a national championship game. They had a 12-1 Fiesta Bowl champion season, I believe, against Oklahoma State with Andrew Luck, and their only loss was to that undefeated regular season Oregon team. Like, that is, I think, a testament to what you're talking about, that some places, I think you can look at Power 5 schools across the country and say, in the next 20 years, it's hard to see them winning a national championship. But then, could they do it 30 or 40 years from now? Well, that kind of depends on what happens in the next
I
20
have the
years
same
or
thing
so.
too. It's like, it's one of those things where if we're talking about short term, it's just so hard.
Yeah, no, it's
it's
a long build for most of these schools, but I think you have to start looking at, with NIL and the portal, how much does the portal really balance the scales in terms of competition, because guys are so willing to leave, right? Can you increase your blue chip ratio dramatically? I would love for who's the guy who does the blue chip ratio thing?
Bud Elliott.
Yeah, Bud Elliott. I
And
would
I'll show
love
you.
to see
Here's a
him.
picture of that from last year.
Yeah, that's a great graphic right there. And you got a lot of the biggest brands and most successful teams in college football year in and year out. So I think what I would be fascinated to see is how does that ratio change, or how does it kind of even out a bit, or how can some schools increase their ratio with the portal now, right? Is it,
Right.
a net zero result because they have just as many high profile players leaving smaller schools as coming in, who, didn't live up to the hype, or it didn't work out at their previous Power 5 stop, whatever the case may be? Or is there a net positive there to where they can have better players on their roster and be more competitive in that space? But I don't think it's impossible for a Pac-12 or a Big 12 team to win a national championship. Is it, a longer shot? Yes, absolutely. But is it out of the realm of possibility? I don't think so. No, right? The same way that I am firmly of the belief, and have been for many years, that a mid-major will win a national championship. And we just had another mid-major team in the national championship.
They've been close. I mean, Butler obviously has been there. Right.
Butler's
That can
been there.
definitely happen.
Gonzaga's been there. Now San Diego State has been there. Like,
Yeah,
just
but
go down the list.
basketball is so much different
It is.
because
Yep.
of the
Yeah,
lack of players on the court, right? I mean,
Yes.
it's only 5 guys at a time. And also these are college players, there are the restrictions on which guys can be in college basketball are not as stringent, or like, you can leave earlier. College football, there are limits on when, certain guys, can go, or, how long they have to be there and stuff. And I hate to, I'm not trying to be doom and gloom, like they can't do it, but guys, this is why we talk about the financial gap, it's being created by the Big Ten and by the SEC right now.
Yeah, it's going to make it even harder.
It just makes it even harder. And, but the other point of this too, like the blue chip ratio is not a guarantee of success.
No,
we look
it
at
is
this
not.
and we
Just
see A&M,
Texas A&M, Oklahoma,
Texas,
Florida, Auburn.
I would say, OU has been so good for so long. Last year was obviously down transition coaching, but like Miami, right? Auburn did not have a good year last year.
Yeah, no, it is
Florida, not a good year last year.
One factor to consider,
but it is a necessity to be on there to win a championship.
Yeah, to be on there, but just getting there is not good enough, right? If money were the only thing that mattered in college football, Texas would win every year. They've got the biggest budget, I believe, in the country.
Like recruiting budget's like insane.
From a revenue standpoint, but that's not it. What is all about? Like I was talking about earlier, you've got to have the money, you've got to have the resources to get there. You got to bring in the players. You got to have the right coach. You got to have the right culture, and you got to have the right season. You've got to have,
and by that you mean also the stuff around you has to,
right,
you have the
right,
opponents
exactly. And sometimes you do need things to go your way. Now that may be, lessened a bit, again, to my chagrin, in the 12-team playoff, where you're going to have much more leeway in any given regular season. But think about even Alabama this past year. They had the number 1 pick in the NFL draft, and they had, a top 10 pick at running back.
Number 3 too.
Oh yeah, and they had the number 3 pick in the draft.
Right.
How could I possibly forget? I don't know where Jahmyr Gibbs where did he go? Like 6?
Number 12. 12 or 14 to the Lions, right?
Yeah, 12 or 14 to the line. Like, just go down all the talent that they had on their team last year, but they were 1 game away, right? So, and that's what I'm talking about with, you have to have the right season in addition to all of the other things. It's why I love college football so much. The standard, the threshold for winning is so much higher than every other sport. There's such a small margin for error, and it's why I think we all can't get enough of it, because and we're in this kind of state of flux a bit in the sport, where I'm really, really intrigued to what I mentioned earlier, and I'll wrap up today with this. Is like, what does the ratio for rosters look like after 4 years of this wild west transfer portal NIL? How does that tip the scales? I've always been of the belief the portal is more impactful than NIL in college football. I think that has been bared out to this point. But what does it do for teams that haven't quite been able to get to that ratio in previous years? How does the portal help or hurt them in that? I think it's a really, really interesting question, and we won't know until sufficient time passes. We can gather some information.
I'll give you my thought on this, and I'll get yours on it as we get out of here. So if I had to pick 3 teams in order, if I just say, okay, these 3 teams, if you put the conference as one big conference together, Big 12 and Pac-12, say you have to pick 3 teams in the next 30 years to win a championship. Which 3 are you taking? I would say Oregon. I would take as number 1.
Oregon has to
because they have to be number 1 because they are the only school that currently actually fits the one criteria that absolutely has to happen. So I think they get there by that. I would say TCU and Baylor as well, because they fit that private school mode. And here's the thing. We've seen TCU in a championship game. So there is proof of concept that you can get both talented players in the portal. You can get good coaches. You can get all those things that you need there and put guys in the league, which obviously is really important to get more players because they can say, hey, I can go to the league from there. Baylor is coming off a year where they had, 2 years ago, they had a really terrible quarterback. They did not have good quarterback play, but their defense, which was elite under Dave Aranda, who is coached at that level, their facilities are great. Right. They have a coach that I think is going to end up being very good. They have the ability to get talented players. They have put a lot of guys in the league. And also Baylor, the thing is, Spencer, we've seen in the last 15 years, 3 separate coaches have won 10 plus games there. Art Briles did it. Matt Rule did it. And also Dave Aranda did it. So succeeding at a super high level at a, basically elite level is possible there. So that's why I would give those 3 to you. What do you think?
Boy, that's tricky, and you can tell I'm responding to this on the spot. Even with my personal bias aside, I think Oregon is a pretty clear option.
I think there's no debate.
Yeah, they've been in 2 national championship games in the last 12 seasons or so. I like your point on Baylor. I think that is an intriguing one, and I feel like I've seen them, be at that level, conference championship, college football playoff level, more consistently actually than TCU, right? Over the several coaches as you referenced. Yeah. My instinct, and again, I've got a Pac-12 flag hanging behind me here. I've thought about Washington in my head. I've thought about Utah in my head. And again, I have thought about Stanford, but I would hesitate to put the Cardinal in there because I've seen them at their peak. But this is a new world of college football, and they don't look like at this point in time they're really super keen on playing the NIL transfer portal game. And is that going to be a huge competitive disadvantage? But if they were to open the floodgates a little bit on that front, Stanford has the sort of money that you're referencing with TCU and Baylor. They absolutely do. They can care about whatever they want. Their boosters, donors, whoever.
They're going to have to care about football.
At some point in time. So I put that question in there, but I'll go with Washington just because I've seen them make the playoff before. Sense. And I've now seen them have 2 playoff caliber teams, like with Baylor, with 2 different coaches. My instinct would be to put Utah because they're the 2-time defending champions. But as Utah has ascended,
the rubber has met the road twice for them against their Big Ten opponents, which is
they have, number 1, and then number 2, they don't seem to capitalize on the recruiting front as much. Right? We're talking about the ratio, and it sounds kind of silly, but history shows you that that's kind of what you need to be able to do. And I think for Utah, they have to make more of an effort. We've seen, individual players like a Clark Phillips. It was a super highly rated recruit, not the sort of guy Utah ever had access to, but their classes are, still very much founded upon doing a little bit more with a little bit less. And that's great for Utah, part of their identity. But if you're going to take that next step, I think Washington's got a greater potential to do so. I've seen them do it before, and I think market-wide and recruiting potential, I think is greater at Washington. So I'll throw the Huskies in there over TCU by a little bit, but I like that. I really do like that Baylor pick because I I like right as you thought about it, I was like, oh yeah, that's right. They've
Yeah, they
won
have
with a
an
lot of
incredible
different
stadium.
coaches.
Yeah.
And when you can win at a high level with that many different coaches, I think it's a testament to the financial support that you have and the cultural
Right.
support that you have at the university.
And they're putting guys in the league at a lot of positions. The one they're actually not doing is quarterback, and that's because the Baylor system has not been one that's produced
No,
that offense.
not at
That
this point.
I mean, yeah,
That's
it's
kind of
not.
like the next step for him, right?
But also, it's not. That's new offense now. Totally new offense for them with
Yeah,
what they're running.
yeah,
So
completely.
yeah, it's an interesting conversation. Obviously, it's going to be a big one. And look, the entire college football is not just winning about winning national championships. I think it's what makes the sport great, right? Progress for your team, your fan base is fantastic, and that's what we should all care about. It's not always about who lifts that trophy at the end. Obviously, it's the goal, but it's not always about that. So that's why we like it. All right, Spencer, where can the folks find you and all of your work in its variety?
Well, if you're watching on YouTube, you can see my Twitter handle right down there is at Smalls_55. I host Locked On Pac-12 and Locked On Ducks Monday through Friday on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts. And we had so much fun with this collaboration yesterday. Josh and I just decided to do it again. So hope you all enjoyed.
And I'm sure you all will be seeing this when we've already done our roundtable. That I know folks are
Yes.
gearing up for tonight as well.
Yes, indeed.
So yeah,
The big
you guys check that out
expansion
too.
table should be fun.
Yeah. Yeah. All right, man. You guys can find me on Twitter at LOBig12. You guys can find the show. Find the show on Twitter at LOBig12. Find me at Josh Neighbors _. Get the show wherever you get your podcast and on YouTube as well. All right, Spencer. Talk to you next week.